I have had some absolutely amazing race experiences where everything's just felt great and I've been in flow state. And I've also had some really awful experiences where everything feels like it's gone wrong and it's, let's just be honest, not been a very enjoyable experience at all. Mary?
Me too. I've had some dream races and I've had some absolute shockers.
And what's the common denominator in all of the races that have gone bad?
We didn't follow the strategy.
Yep, that's right. We did not follow the simple strategy, the three-step process that I've kind of worked out over the years, and it's come back to bite us in the bum every single time. So that's what we're going to go through with you on this video, is the 3 things that you can do to make sure that you give yourself the best chance of nailing race day every single time. And we're going to do it with a run on the seafront. Exciting.
Let's do it.
Now, the whole basis of this entire strategy is about knowing what 3 different elements of your running feel like. So in feel rather than what they look like, and then how they interplay with each other, how they work off each other, so that if something goes wrong, you've got other bits to fall back on. And it starts with heart rate. But before we get into how we know our heart rate better, we probably need to quickly touch on the why, because I think it's something that not a lot of people know, you know, why the heart rate does what it does. I think what we probably do know is that an increased heart rate is an indicator that you are working harder. But it's why that's important in the context of racing and making sure you control the heart rate. And let's start with why we would need to know our heart rate in a marathon, because as we know, a marathon is a largely aerobic event. We want to be in our base zones. So what happens when our heart rate creeps up out of our base zones early in a race? Well, quite simply put, in as easier words as I can put them, your body will switch from metabolizing fat, which is using as your energy when it's easy, when it's in your base zones, and it will move on to using carbohydrates because it's a more readily available and easier to get energy source. Now, that sounds like, well, what's the worry there? Well, of course, if you go to your carbohydrate stores early in a marathon, you probably only have about an hour and a half's worth of carbohydrates in your body before you have to put things back in. So you don't want to start dipping into your, what we'd call it, piggy bank early, and then by the end of the marathon and with the last 10k realize that you've not got much left, that you're already done. And the high heart rate is an indicator of this process. So it's important to control our heart rate early so that we don't start dipping into our savings, if you put it. About punchier races like 5 and 10k where you're going to be burning carbs from the off, you're in higher heart rate zones anyway. Does it matter how high you go early? Well, yeah, it does as well, because what can happen is if you go too high on a shorter race and your heart rate drifts too high for your body to keep up with, and the reason it's doing that is because you're accumulating lactic acid and you can't get enough oxygen in to flush it away. So you're going to have to inevitably slow down, which sucks early on in a race. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, my point is, it's always important to get a grip on and know your heart rate whilst you're in a race so that you can get the best out of you on the day. So now we deal with the how, as in how can you get to know your heart rate in such a way that you won't rely on it in race day, at least being able to see it on a watch. It's actually, I mean, it's pretty simple. The first thing is you need to know what each zone feels like, not just what your aerobic zone feels like. The first tactic I like to use is blind challenges, and I'm going to do one for you right now. We're just about to hit 6 kilometers, and 6 till 7 kilometers I'm gonna not look at my watch and I'm gonna guess what my heart rate is towards the end of that kilometer and feed it back. Other things you can do is blind tempo as well. So blind tempo is basically doing a tempo run. If you've not done it before, I'll link a video here, but it's doing a tempo run without looking at your watch and hoping, trying to feel that you're in zone 3 rather than looking at the watch to be in zone 3. And the point is, you'll get a lot of these wrong a lot of the time, but rather do it in training. That's the point here. That's why we practice. I reckon if I were to look down at my watch, I'd be high 149s, maybe into early 15s, because I'm lifting the camera up. 159. because I'm lifting the camera up. And you know what? Once you start nailing what your heart rate feels like at different paces, you're on the road. This is the first part of the triangle, the first part of the 3. So there you have it, you've got heart rate, and I like to think of heart rate as one corner of a triangle. I nearly said 3-sided triangle there, but all triangles 3-sided. Anyway, it's one corner of the triangle, and it means that when you're out there, when you're running a certain pace and you know what heart rate that is, you know what running in zone 2 feels like, you know what running in zone 3 feels like in terms of your heart rate, you even know maybe what your marathon pace or half marathon pace heart rate feels like. But that's just one side of the triangle. Your heart rate monitor might stop working, you might be too much adrenaline or too much excitement on race day, you need more. So let's give you more. The second element that you need to get good at knowing is your pace. That is to say, how certain paces feel when you're running them. If we rely just on heart rate in a race, then we're putting ourselves at risk of misreading situations. Or what if our heart rate monitor breaks? That's happened to me before, and so I was fortunate enough to be able to fall back on my pacing strategy along with the third part of the approach that we'll talk about later. As with heart rate, being able to lock into the feel of different paces must be practiced in training and compared with your heart rate. For example, a 5-minute kilometre on the flat will feel very different to a 5-minute kilometre up a hill, or even a 5-minute kilometre down a hill, and it'll have very different heart rate values as well. And I'm going to link a video above that has 5 games that you can play to get to know your heart rate and pace better. But here's a good example, a blind base 5k where you just try to run all 5 kilometres easy and as close to the same pace as possible, but without looking at your watch. And what it does is it forces you to read your body, it forces you to feel the signs of hard or easy running and be able to adapt. And also, you may have a time in mind that you want to run your particular race in. I mean, that's not vital, but some people do enjoy it. But if you haven't practiced that pace in training, if you don't know exactly how it feels, then how do you stick to your plan on the day when factors like adrenaline, crowds, and competition come into play? You need ways of drowning out anything on race day that can blow your plan up. But remember, if your watch stops working or your GPS won't connect or something like that, then you're going to thank your lucky stars you practiced what pace feels like in conjunction with the other 2 elements. Alright, there's side 2 of the triangle, pace. We now know what different paces feel like. We might know what our marathon pace feels like, we might know what our half marathon or 5k or 10k time feels like, and that's important with pace, but it's even more important to be able to link those paces up with a heart rate, or at least a heart rate that you usually hit for those paces, and you even know what that heart rate might be for that pace going up a hill or down a hill or on the flat. And once you get to kind of this point, then of course you can start adapting in the race. If you're running the pace that you want for your marathon, but your heart rate is too high, then you know that something's out of line and you might have to reduce that pace rather than just trying to batter on the door because that's the pace you want to run. You're starting to use these skills to play with each other, to weave in with each other in order to make sure that you have the best race experience. And of course we've got to factor in the fact that in most of your races, a faster pace than maybe your plan still feels good, and at that point you're still in the early days of the race, so the heart rate hasn't quite caught up. So you need to not get caught in the trap of I feel good, I'm running fast and my heart rate is saying it's okay. There's another element to all of this. There's the third part of the triangle, and it's perhaps the most crucial part, because if heart rate stops working, or if your watch stops working completely and you can't see your pace, you've still got this to fall back on. And the third element in this process, and what I like to think of as the middleman, is RPE, and what that stands for is rating of perceived exertion. It just really means how hard do you feel like you're working. I'm going to put a table up here somewhere. Some people do it out of 20. I like to do it very easily, 1 to 10. How hard do you feel? If 10 was your absolutely flat out 1 kilometer style pace, and 1 would be in bed sleeping, and you get an idea of where you need to be for each of the efforts, for each of the distances that you're doing. But RPE is absolutely crucial for a number of different reasons, and that is that not all races are equal. Of course, if you're racing completely on the flat, that's a completely different race to a really hilly trail race, and yet the RPE will always be the same. You just know that, for example, if you're out running on a flat training session, then an RPE of 7 out of 10 might, for example, be a 5-minute kilometer, but an RPE of 7 out of 10 while you're going up a hill feel, that might be 6.5 minute kilometers. So it's really, really important to get to know these feels, because they kind of link the heart rate and the pace together on race day. It's your third gauge, it's your way of making sure the other two are in check, and it's why I think it's absolutely critical. And again, in training, it's as simple as this. Maybe whilst you're out on an easy run, don't look at your watch and run a kilometre at what you think is 6 out of 10, what you feel is 6 out of 10. And then when the watch beeps and tells you what that kilometre is, you'll have a good gauge of what that equates to in pace if you were running on the flat, or maybe if you're running up a hill. And on any given day, a feel of 7 out of 10 might equate to a different kilometre. And really what you do is you just build a bank of evidence over time, rather than this 1 kilometre feels like this, so that's how fast it should be. It doesn't work like that. It's just about, in each training session, if you're doing a tempo run, if you're doing an easy run, if you're doing intervals, how do these feel? And over time you'll build up that idea of what a 7 out of 10 actually is, or an 8 out of 10 actually is, or a 4 out of 10 actually is. I like to think of it as my safety mechanism, as my fallback. It's the element that binds all three really together, because feel ultimately is going to really come good for you on race day. And there we go. The third part of the triangle, I'm going to put it at the top because I actually think it's potentially the most important of the three in terms of helping your race day, at least, because whilst yes, most of the time I rely on my heart rate and my pace on my watch when I'm racing, there have been times when my watch has stopped working, or at least my heart rate has stopped working. And the thing that I fall back on more than any is RPE. How do I feel like I'm running in this race? What does it feel like? Can I gauge it? So if I want to be somewhere like a 7 in a particular race, then I have to really hone in on those details. What does that 7 feel like? I already know because I've done it in training. I know what a 7 feels like on the flat. I know what a 7 feels like uphill. I know what a 7 feels like later on in a long run, because a 7 at the start of a run doesn't even feel like a 7 later on in the run. We have to remember that. But ultimately, if all technology fails, you've still got this that doesn't rely on technology to fall back on. If you hadn't practiced this in training, then you're essentially running blind. And you might get away with it, but I find quite often on the excitement of a race day, with all the adrenaline pumping, with all the crowds, with people that you're racing, that you potentially do go too hard, and then you're going to blow up, or at the very least you're not going to have a great experience in the race where you could have done had you have practiced the RPE, what it feels like. And you know what, weave all these three together and crucially actually pay attention to them in the race, because that's the big thing, that's when it's gone wrong for Mary and I even, is that we've not paid attention to the details. Then you're gonna have a great race. You're not gonna hit the wall, you're not gonna blow up, or at least you're gonna give yourself the best chance of having the great race. There's no guarantees in life, there's no guarantees in anything, but you want to give yourself the best chance. So there you have it. Get good at combining these three key skills in any race and learning how they interplay with each other, and not only are you bulletproofed if your watch fails, but also you're more likely to be able to execute a plan, or even better, adapt on the fly during a race. By learning the three skills, you're making a commitment to yourself to be better and taking a proactive approach to understanding how your own body works during different situations like races or training, going up hills, running on flat, an easy run or tempo runs. And once you've done this, as long as you can block out the other distractions and noises on race day, you give yourself the best chance of being able to see all of your hard work in training come to fruition during a race, rather than simply going into a race hoping you have a good one. And you know what? We've not even touched on nutrition or hydration, which are obviously extremely crucial for race day, especially in the longer distances. So here's a video that I think might help. It's a little bit older, but I think it can still provide value. And above that is a video about the 4 things that have saved my running life, i.e. how I approach running, and especially how I approach setbacks. As always, consider subscribing, but no hard sell, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Thanks for watching.